These are just some of the things that Pablo Escobar owned as the Medellin cartel kingpin. At the peak of his career, he was making $50 million in cash every single day. But he's not alone. Throughout Central and South America, cartel bosses are fighting for the highest net worth position and stopping at nothing to get the money and power. Let's take a look at the cartel members with the most impressive net worth. El Chapo, $1 billion. Starting off humble, before Pablo Escobar's reign was over, Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman was climbing the ranks of the notorious Guadalajara cartel. But after his boss, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, was arrested in 1988, El Chapo, meaning Shorty, established his own empire, the Sinaloa cartel. At first, he was producing and smuggling weed into the U.S. Then it was white powder, heroin, and crystal. El Chapo built distribution cells and long-range tunnels near the U.S. border. It was a pioneering move that allowed him to smuggle more narcotics than any other trafficker in history. But don't think El Chapo was just a good businessman. Much like Pablo Escobar, El Chapo killed, maimed, and bribed his way to the top. In 2014, he claimed he killed between 2,000 and 3,000 people. By the time of his third and last arrest, El Chapo made a staggering $12.7 billion. Wait, what was that about his 3 arrests? El Chapo was first arrested in Guatemala in 1993 and extradited to a Mexican prison. But in 2001, he bribed his way out of prison via a laundry bin. In 2014, he was arrested in Mexico, but escaped just a year later by digging a tunnel under his shower. By now, he had so much money that his wife bought the house and patch of land where the prison tunnel led, and his own right-hand man, El Mayo, got him out of the house with a helicopter. El Chapo had 9 luxury houses, several cars, and boats, worth about $1 billion altogether. He also had his own diamond-encrusted pistol bearing his initials. Money made El Chapo feel untouchable by the authorities, but in the cartel world, no one is untouchable. In January 2016, he was arrested in a massive shootout. This time, he was extradited to the U.S. and sent to the country's highest security prison, ADX Florence. You could see the fear on his face the moment he landed on U.S. soil. And the fear was warranted. He will be serving a life sentence at the Florence Supermax, confined to a tiny cell with 0 social time and almost no visits from his family either. He currently has an estimated net worth of $1 billion, but the prosecution wants El Chapo to pay back all the $12.7 billion he's made throughout his career. Perhaps El Chapo finally got what was coming for him. Griselda Blanco, $2 billion. Griselda Blanco, aka the Black Widow and the godmother of coke, was as tough as she was rich. Well, tough is a light word. She was a sociopathic killer. When she was 11 years old, she committed her first murder, killing a younger boy after his family failed to pay ransom for his kidnapping. Then she got only worse. She entered the coke trade in the 1970s, and by the 1980s, she had illegally settled in Miami and became a central figure in the Miami drug wars. In fact, she became known as the deadliest drug lord, or lady, alive. She was responsible for anywhere between 200 and 2,000 people. A former Florida detective said,
"Griselda was worse than any of the men that were involved in the drug trade."
The Black Widow even killed all her 3 husbands out of jealousy, spite, or over business arguments. For Griselda, it was all about attaining fear and power and her impressive murderous rampages. But of course, it was also about the money. She was the first to use women as drug mules, realizing that people were less likely to stop them. She created her own range of multi-pocketed lingerie, and her women would hide huge amounts of white powder on smuggling runs in the lingerie they wore. This is how Griselda Blanco amassed a net worth of $2 billion. At the height of her career, she was making $80 million a month. But it all came to a brutal end. In 1985, she was arrested in California and sentenced to 20 years in prison. In 2012, she was shot in the head while visiting a butcher's shop in Medellin, Colombia. By then, 3 out of her 4 sons had been murdered. She once had a luxury villa in Miami, a bone china tea set that once belonged to the Queen, and a gold-plated, emerald-studded submachine gun. By 2012, her net worth had been reduced to ashes, a small price for Griselda's cruelty. Carlos Leder, $2.7 billion. We remain in Colombia for the next cartel boss. Carlos Leder was half German but born in Colombia, and when he was 15, he immigrated with his recently divorced mom to the US. That's where he started smuggling stolen cars into Canada. It wasn't long before he was sent to prison, but in prison, he found out just how popular white powder was becoming in the US. So when he was released, he had a new plan. First, he built a small coke smuggling business. In the late 1970s, Leder slowly bought the island of Norman's Cay and forced its 100-plus residents out by harassing and even murdering them. By now, he had his own smuggling hub in the Caribbean, a lawless place rife with illegal business. Soon, the cash started pouring in. 300 kilograms of coke would arrive on the island every single day, and Leder now had $1 billion net worth. Around this time, Leder founded the infamous Medellin cartel together with his new business partner, Pablo Escobar. Yep, the two of them made billions together. Now they were both on the DEA's most wanted list. But just like Escobar, Leder had political ambitions too, of the worst kind. He founded a new Nazi political party called the National Latino Movement. His main goal was to ban extradition laws. That way, cartel kingpins would be virtually protected from the tougher American law. But Leder's behavior was so radical and his island was so militarized that his own cartel started turning against him. Slowly but surely, he was sold to the DEA. In 1983, the government froze all his bank accounts and took over his property and possessions. Leder had amassed $2.7 billion. Now, he was nearly bankrupt. In 1987, he was extradited to the US, where he was tried and sentenced to life without parole, plus an additional 135 years. In June 2020, however, he was released on parole and allowed to fly to Germany due to a cancer diagnosis. But today, he is penniless. A German charity is paying for his cancer treatment. Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela. $3 billion. When you think Colombian cartels, you probably think of Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel first. But the Cali cartel was equally ruthless and a worthy adversary of Escobar's run until his death in 1993. The Cali cartel bosses were brothers Gilberto and Miguel Orejuela, but the brothers weren't always Escobar's sworn enemies. They started out as friends, making $1 billion each year together as they produced and smuggled white powder into the United States. But in 1987, Escobar presented Gilberto to sell Pacho Herrera to the authorities. Escobar was upset with Pacho, and Gilberto knew he would actually be signing El Pacho's death sentence if he handed him over to Escobar. So when he refused, Escobar declared war.
Quiere decir que usted no es mi amigo, y el que no es mi amigo es mi enemigo. Y como enemigo lo voy a tratar de hoy en adelante. Eso es más o menos a grosso modo hasta allí, ¿no?
Gilberto was convinced that he and his brother would die any day. No one had the money, power, and army of Pablo Escobar. But today, Miguel is alive and well, and Gilberto long outlasted Pablo Escobar. So what happened? The brothers realized their only hope was teaming up with Colombian authorities to bring down Escobar and the Medellin cartel. And after Escobar had assassinated the prime minister, the government was extra motivated to capture him. So Gilberto contacted the president's brother, Jorge Barco.
Lo peligrosa que era la organización de Medellín. Le mostramos pruebas de los asesinatos y de los crímenes que han cometido.
The army was reluctant to collaborate with the Orejuela brothers. They were the kingpins of the Cali cartel. They had $3 billion net worth, amassed from illegal work. But unlike the vicious Medellin, Cali cartel was never famous for murdering, maiming, and kidnapping. They were more in the bribing and smuggling business, and they had a code of honor that far exceeded that of Escobar. So eventually, Virgilio and Jorge Barco, the president and his brother, convinced the Colombian army to let the Orejuela brothers help them bring down Escobar. With their intelligence, the Colombian government and the DEA were able to arrest dozens of Medellin cartel members. And in December 1993, the DEA fatally shot Escobar, finally dissolving a notorious cartel that claimed thousands of lives. But this didn't mean that the Cali cartel stopped working. And when the authorities saw the Orejuela brothers weren't going to turn to the good side, they began pursuing them as well. In 1995, both brothers were arrested and sentenced to prison in Colombia. In 2005, they were extradited to the United States and sentenced to 30 years in prison for conspiracy to import illegal substances and money laundering. Today, Miguel is imprisoned at FCI Loreto in the U.S. Gilberto succumbed to a short illness in May 2022 and died in prison, aged 83. Their once giant net worth was all but lost. They had to return $2 billion in forfeits to the American government. Interestingly enough, although the Cali cartel was once supplying 80% of the world's coke, the Orejuela brothers were famously modest in their appearance and lifestyle. Gilberto drove a Mazda and wore smart suits, but never wore fancy accessories or showed off his money in any way. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, $25 billion. Here, we jump into the really high net worth kingpins. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was born in 1956 in Sinaloa, Mexico. That's right, the home of the biggest cartel today. But back then, the Sinaloa cartel did not exist, just the Guadalajara, led by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. But by the late 1970s, the Guadalajara organization was led by Don Neto, or Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo. Recognize the name? Yep, Amado was his nephew. But Amado didn't stick to his family. He collaborated with all Mexican cartels, and even with Escobar in Colombia. His white powder would pass through Mexico on the way to the US, and Amado was one of his go-to men. It was his connections and ruthlessness that earned him a $25 billion net worth. First, he overtook the Juarez cartel after killing their leader, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, with his own hands. Then, he bought 27 Boeing 727 jets that flew regularly into the United States carrying coke. This is how he earned his nickname, Lord of the Skies. But in 1997, Mexican and American authorities were out to get him. Desperate to flee the country, he went to get plastic surgery, hoping to change his face so radically that no authorities would recognize him. He died on the operation table. Pablo Escobar, $30 billion. To this day, no one equals Pablo Escobar in cartel money. He was born into a poor Colombian family, and his first salary was $3 a day. Desperate for quick cash, and with a penchant for breaking the law, he started stealing tombstones, then cars, then went into commercial robberies. In 1976, he founded the notorious Medellin cartel. He was moving tons of white powder and marijuana into the United States and bribing officials left and right to protect his business. If an official would refuse the bribe, they would get the bullet. This is what led to Escobar's infamous saying, plata o plomo, directly translated into silver or lead, meaning money or a bullet. This was the official's choice. At the height of his business, Escobar made $50 million in cash every single day. This was too much money to launder, so much that Escobar started burying it in huge barrels across Colombia. Most of the barrels haven't been found to this day. Escobar would hire a man to hide the barrels, then shoot him in the head so no one else would know their location. Escobar even worked with accountants to exploit the banking systems in the US and Europe. He had just about 1 billion methods of money laundering. In 1980, he had $10 million. 1 decade later, he had $37 billion. But his net worth was made from killing civilians, torturing rivals, bombing cars, and assassinating government officials. So by 1993, his cartel had been reduced to ashes by the DEA, Mexican authorities, and the vigilante group Los Pepes. Escobar's assets and accounts were frozen, and he lived his last months on the run, alone and terrified. In December 1993, he was shot down on top of a Medellin rooftop. Today, all of his money has been confiscated by authorities, bar the cash barrels that are still buried in unknown locations. What would you do if you had billions like them? And do you think these king and queen pins got what they deserved in the end?